On August 3, 1492, 3 ships left the coast of Spain and sailed west into the Atlantic Ocean. No European ship had ever sailed this far west and returned. The man commanding them believed he could reach Asia by sailing west. He was wrong about the route. He was wrong about the distance. He was wrong about what he found when he got there. But he found it anyway. And the woman who said yes, the woman who funded the voyage, who signed the commission, who wagered the credibility of the Spanish crown on a Genoa sailor's impossible dream, was 40 years old. She had already survived a civil war. She had unified a kingdom. She had completed a religious crusade, 700 years in the making. And she had done all of this by the time she opened the world. This is the story of the most consequential queen in the history of Western civilization. What she built, what it cost, and the empire that bore her name, but not her wisdom. For 300 years after she was gone, Isabella of Castile was born into a world that had almost no use for her. Her father died when she was 3. Her brother, the male heir, Alfonso, was the important one. Her mother, Isabella de Portugal, suffered what contemporaries described as a mental breakdown after her husband's death, and spent years in increasing isolation. Isabella grew up in a castle in Arevalo, educated, pious, watching, a girl the court had largely forgotten existed. This is the part of Isabella'S story that her later admirers sometimes skip, because the woman who would open the world spent her childhood learning what it felt like to be overlooked. Her half-brother Enrique IV ruled Castile from 1454 until his death in 1474. His reign was one of the most politically chaotic in Castilian history. His authority constantly challenged by noble factions. His daughter Juana's legitimacy questioned so aggressively that she was nicknamed La Beltraneja, the daughter of Beltran, implying her real father was one of Enrique's court favorites. Isabella was brought to court as a teenager and immediately became the subject of every faction's marriage plans. She was a princess of royal blood in a kingdom that was running out of uncontested heirs. Every powerful man in Castile, and several powerful men outside it, had ideas about who she should marry. She had her own ideas. And what happened next changed the history of the world. On October 19, 1469, Isabella married Ferdinand of Aragon in a ceremony her own king had forbidden. She had negotiated the marriage herself, sent her own messengers, arranged her own terms, secured the papal dispensation. 18 years old, acting against the wishes of the king of her kingdom, managing a diplomatic negotiation that most experienced courtiers would have found challenging. She was not defying Enrique because she was in love with Ferdinand, though by most accounts, she was defying him because she had concluded that Ferdinand of Aragon was the specific political alliance that would give her the best chance of what she actually wanted, the throne of Castile. When Enrique died in 1474, Isabella proclaimed herself Queen of Castile within 2 days, not waiting, not seeking permission, not relying on Ferdinand to claim it for her. She proclaimed herself queen, and then fought a 5-year civil war to make the proclamation stick. The War of Castilian Succession was won through a combination of Ferdinand's military command and Isabella'S political management. She organized the finances. She managed the noble alliances. She kept the political coalition together through 5 years of military and diplomatic attrition. In 1479, Ferdinand inherited Aragon from his father. Suddenly, the two teenagers, who had married in a secret ceremony in Valladolid, ruled the two most powerful kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula. Their motto was Tanto Monta, Monta Tanto. Equal in authority, equal in purpose. The partnership that would produce the most powerful state in Europe had begun with a forbidden wedding and a 5-year war. What Isabella and Ferdinand built together in the 15 years between their marriage and Columbus's voyage was something that had never existed before. In the Iberian Peninsula, a functioning state, Castile before Isabella was a kingdom where noble factions effectively operated as private governments within the crown's territory, where the law meant whatever the nearest powerful nobleman decided it meant, where royal authority was theoretical in large areas of the kingdom and purely ceremonial in others. Isabella changed this, not through a single dramatic reform, through 20 years of patient, determined, often brutal institutional reconstruction. And then, in January 1492, 7 months before Columbus sailed, the Kingdom of Granada fell. The Reconquista, the Christian reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule, a campaign that had been ongoing for 700 years, was complete. Isabella rode into Granada on January 2, 1492. It was, by every measure, the greatest military achievement of her reign, the completion of a project that 40 generations of Spanish Christians had worked toward. And then, 3 months later, she signed the Alhambra Decree. The Alhambra Decree expelled every Jew from Spain, between 40,000 and 200,000 people. Historians still debate the exact number, given 4 months to convert to Christianity, or leave everything they had built. Over centuries, Spain expelled some of its most educated, most commercially sophisticated, most intellectually productive citizens. In the same year it opened the Americas, and in August, Columbus sailed west. Columbus sailed west in 1492, looking for a trade route to Asia. He found, instead, something that remade the world. Within 2 years of Columbus's return, Isabella had negotiated with Portugal, through papal mediation, the Treaty of Tordesillas, the treaty that divided the entire non-European world between Spain and Portugal, 2 kingdoms dividing the world on a map. And here is where the story of Isabella's empire becomes the most morally complex in this entire series, because Isabella, the woman who had reformed Castile's legal system, who had established national law enforcement, who had built the most functionally organized state in Western Europe, watched the colonization of the Americas begin, and she understood what was happening. The historical record is specific about this. Isabella repeatedly issued orders prohibiting the enslavement of indigenous Americans. She summoned Columbus to answer for the reports of abuse she was receiving. She questioned whether the conquest was being conducted in accordance with her explicit instructions. She was 1,000 miles from the Caribbean. Her orders arrived months after they were sent. Her administrators were a law unto themselves, in a world she could not see, and the system she had authorized, the encomienda, the forced labor, the extraction economy, was already killing people. faster than any intervention from Castile could prevent. What happened in the Americas after Isabella opened the door was not what she authorized, but it happened in her name, under her flag, through the system she created. The distance between intention and consequence had never been larger. She died in 1504, 12 years after Columbus sailed, knowing the world had changed beyond anything she had imagined, not knowing the full weight of what she had set in motion. Isabella died on November 26, 1504. She was 53 years old. In her will, one of the most carefully constructed royal testaments in history, she left specific instructions. Her kingdoms were to pass to her daughter Juana. Her soul was to be prayed for, and the indigenous people of the Americas were to be treated with justice and fairness. That last provision was honored the least. Her daughter Juana, the heir she had raised and prepared to rule, was declared incapable of governing within months of Isabella'S death. Whether Juana was genuinely ill, or whether she was a woman whose grief and political vulnerability were used by the men around her to remove her from power, historians still debate. What is not debated is the outcome. Juana spent 46 years in confinement, never ruling, never free, dying in 1555 without having governed a single day of the empire her mother had built for her. The empire grew. Under Charles V, Isabella'S grandson, it reached its maximum extent. Mexico, Peru, the silver mines of Potosi, the Philippines, parts of Italy and Germany, an empire larger than any European state had ever governed. And the cost? The indigenous populations of the Americas declining by as much as 90% within a century of Columbus's arrival. Disease, forced labor, violence, the three mechanisms of a system that Isabella had tried to constrain, and that her successors let run. The silver of Potosi, mined by indigenous and later enslaved African labor, pouring into Spain, not building Spain, flowing through Spain to the bankers who had financed the Habsburgs' wars. The empire Isabella built was the most powerful in the world for a century after her death, and it was being hollowed out by the same forces she had spent her reign trying to defeat: overextension, corruption, the substitution of extracted wealth for productive economy, the reliance on silver rather than institutions. The Spanish Armada's defeat in 1588, 84 years after Isabella'S death, was not the end of the Spanish Empire. It was the beginning of its end. The empire she had built lasted 300 years after her. It never found another Isabella. Here is what makes Isabella perhaps the most contested ruler in the history of the Western world. Everything she did was real. All of it. The achievement and the cost. Simultaneously true. She unified Spain and expelled its Jewish population. She established the rule of law in Castile and established the Inquisition. She opened the Americas to European contact and opened the door to one of the largest demographic catastrophes in human history. She tried to protect indigenous Americans and created the system that destroyed them. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478 under Isabella'S authority, has become one of the most mythologized institutions in European history. The popular imagination gives it hundreds of thousands of victims. The historical record, which is actually quite well preserved, suggests approximately 3,000 to 5,000. Executions over 3.5 centuries. That is not a small number. Each death was a real person. But the mythologization has served a specific political purpose, making the Inquisition a uniquely Spanish horror. In a Europe where burning heretics was standard practice, in every Christian kingdom, the honest assessment of Isabella requires holding all of this simultaneously. The reformer and the oppressor, the patron of Columbus and the authorizer of a system that would kill millions, the protector of indigenous rights, and the queen whose flag flew over their destruction. Her legacy is not a question that history has answered. It is a question that history continues to ask, louder with each generation, because the world she opened has not yet finished reckoning with how it was opened. The Alhambra Palace still stands in Granada. The Arabic inscriptions on its walls, "There is no victor but God," still visible in every room. The palace that Isabella captured in 1492 survived her by 5 centuries. The world Isabella opened in 1492 still exists. We are living in it. The borders of South and Central America, drawn by the same Treaty of Tordesillas that Isabella negotiated, are still essentially the borders on the map today. The Spanish language, spoken by over 500 million people, is the direct consequence of her empire. The Catholic Church in Latin America, serving the world's largest Catholic population, was planted by the missionaries who sailed under her flag. And the reckoning, the unfinished, continuing, ongoing reckoning with what was done to the people who were already there, is also the consequence of her decision. Isabella died not knowing what she had truly done. She knew she had opened the world. She did not know the full cost of the opening. She believed the historical record is clear on this, that she was building a Christian empire that would spread the faith and protect the innocent. She built an empire that did neither consistently, reliably, as policy. And here is the warning. Her story carries not about Isabella specifically, about the gap between intention and system. Isabella built a state. She could not build a conscience into it. She could not install, in the administrators 1,000 miles away, the specific moral seriousness that she brought to every decision she made. The system ran without her. And systems, once built, run according to their own logic, not the intentions of their architects. Isabella I of Castile was one of the most capable rulers in the history of the world. She was also the architect of consequences she could not foresee, control, or, in the end, stop. The greatest empires are rarely built by people who wanted to cause harm. They are built by people who believed they were building something good, and who could not see, from where they stood, what the building looked like from the other side of the door they had just opened. Isabella opened the world. Whether the world she opened was good for the world she found is the question that 5 centuries have not yet finished answering.